Welcome to the 16th Asian Clean Energy Forum, ACEF 2021. I'm Steve Peters and I'll be your moderator today. I'm from the Energy Sector Group at ADB. ACEF is ADB's flagship energy event and is coming to you virtually for the second year in succession due to the ongoing impacts of the pandemic. This year's ACEF will look deeper into energy transition. Here's a short video presentation explaining this year's themes.
Energy flows into every aspect of life. It powers change and ultimately growth. While the global pandemic may have slowed progress momentarily, COVID-19's impact on health, poverty, and the environment has made our next steps even clearer, and the drive to accelerate the low-carbon transition in Asia and the Pacific even greater. With countries worldwide poised to rethink how to move forward amid the new normal, there is a golden opportunity to shift gears and turn towards a greener path. The transition to clean energy can play a key role in revitalizing economies. Advances in technology, financing, governance and reform, and gender equality can help push this transition in the region. As we work together to tackle climate change, one thing is clear: we must move forward despite the barriers, and the time to accelerate is now.
The Vice President for Knowledge Management and Sustainable Development at ADB, Dr. Bambang Susantono, will now provide introductory remarks.
Thank you, Steve. Honorable distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues in the clean energy sector, a very warm welcome to the 16th Asia Clean Energy Forum. Once again, we are holding a virtual forum as the world continues to grapple with the COVID-19 pandemic. But meet we must, especially as this is a critical time in the global fights against climate change. This November, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change will hold its 26th Conference of Parties, or COP26, in Glasgow. COP26 will firm up more ambitious targets for reducing carbon emissions by 2030, with the ultimate goal of reaching carbon neutrality by 2050. The energy sector will play a decisive role in this effort. I'm happy to note that this year ACEF theme of accelerating the low carbon transition in Asia and the Pacific fully aligns with the COP26 agenda, as well as the Paris Agreement, Sustainable Development Goals, and ADB's own Strategy 2030, which institutionalize ADB's climate efforts where the energy sector has a vital role. In the past year, clean energy investment made up almost half of ADB energy sector lending. Clean energy investment doubled from $1 billion in 2019 to $1.9 billion in 2020, which comprised 57% energy efficiency and 43% renewable energy. Clean energy investment in 2020 are expected to boost electricity generation capacity by 3.4 gigawatts and reduce greenhouse gas emissions by nearly 7 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. ADB's effort in the energy sector has provided energy access to an additional 10.3 million households in 2020. Moving forward, we hope that our discussion here at ACEF will further ADB's clean energy advocacies and add momentum to the global effort to mitigate and to adapt to climate change while promoting sustainable development. So what can we expect in this year ACEF? At this opening session, we will hear ADB President Masatsugu Asakawa's welcome remarks, along with the keynote message of COP26 President-designated Alok Sharma and U.S. Agency for International Development Acting Assistant Administrator for Asia, Karen Freeman. Afterwards, we will move on to a panel discussions. Along with these exciting activities, our agendas include spotlight sessions that focus on clean energy innovations. There will also be a deep dive workshops on various aspects of clean energy, such as business models, technology, financing, and regulatory policies. These are in addition to the regional sessions on sharing lessons learned from our ADB operations. The forum will also examine how the public and private sector can work together to pursue cross-sectoral initiatives that benefit the society, particularly the poor. These include how to support solar-powered water pumps to help farmers irrigate their fields, or how to help poor families access clean energy. In this regard, freeing up women's time through better access to clean energy, in particular, can contribute to increasing their income significantly. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, at this point, allow me to describe the two thematic tracks of this forum to provide a sharper focus for our discussions. The first track is tracing future paths with technology roadmap for nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. To help countries attain their NDCs, our discussion on this first track will focus on how to develop technology roadmaps that will guide their transitions to clean energy. For this purpose, we must consider not only the existing technologies, but also those emerging and potentially game-changing technology that can allow countries to achieve their more ambitious targets. For instance, carbon capture utilization and storage, hydrogen, storage and charging stations, and smart grid system. These technology roadmaps must balance the triple goals of economic growth, poverty reductions, and climate actions. The shift to clean energy must achieve both carbon neutrality and sustainable development that lifts people out of poverty. And critically, it must attract the financial support of the private sector to address the huge investment requirement. The second track will tackle how to rebound from COVID-19 using integrated solutions. Here, we will examine the impact of the pandemic has had on economies, the energy sectors, and the environment. Based on that, we will explore the opportunities and options for combining economic recovery with a transition to clean energy. One challenge we face is that COVID-19 impact has been very uneven on different economic and social sectors. Left to itself, the recovery process will put different socioeconomic groups on divergent paths. In terms of the sector, we are already seeing clear indications that some, such as technology, digital financial services, and online retail e-commerce are thriving, while others are hit severely, travel and tourism being the most obvious. We are also seeing risks of vulnerable groups being left behind in the recovery, what we call the K-shaped recovery. So we must make a conscious effort to assist the poor and the disadvantaged groups, including providing them access to reliable and affordable clean energy. Distinguished guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, our agenda for the 16th ASEF presents us an opportunity to make a difference and help speed up the low carbon transition in the region. For us in ADB, this ASEF is also very timely because we are currently holding a series of consultations with many different stakeholders as part of the process of reviewing our energy policy. This is a very important exercise for setting ADB strategic course in this important sector. And discussion in the ASEF thematic discussions will no doubt give invaluable insights to inform our review. I look forward to your active participation in the discussion. And once again, thank you for joining the 2021 Asia Clean Energy Forum. Back to you, Steve.
Thanks, Vice President Susantono. President and Chief Executive Officer of the Korean Energy Agency, Dr. Chung Seok Kim, will now provide introductory remarks.
네, 안녕하세요. 반갑습니다. 한국에너지공단 이사장 김창서입니다. 아시아와 태평양의 저탄소 전환의 가속화를 위한 아시아 클린 에너지 포럼 ASEF 2010에 참석하신 여러분께 환영의 인사를 드립니다. 작년과 마찬가지로 코로나19 대응을 위해 온라인으로 진행되는 이번 ASEF 2021은 그 어느 해보다 특별하다고 생각합니다. 이런 특별한 행사를 함께 준비해 주신 ADB의 마사스쿠 아스카와 총재님과 ADB 밤방 수산토노 부총재님, USAID 카렌 프리먼 국장님, 아울러 포럼에 참석하시는 모든 분에게도 인사를 드립니다. 2년이 넘는 동안 우리가 경험하고 있는 코로나19 바이러스의 문제로 인해서 보건, 사회, 경제 분야뿐만 아니라 모든 영역에서 우리의 삶의 패턴이 바뀌었고 이는 인류의 삶과 미래까지 바꾸고 위협받고 있습니다. 백신이 보급되고 있지만 아직 전 세계적으로 백신 접종률이 10%대로 그리 높지 않습니다. 대부분의 나라에서 백신 확보 전쟁 중이고 저소득 국가는 백신 확보가 더욱 힘들 것이라고 전망하고 있습니다. 빠르게 확산되는 전염병으로부터 모든 사람이 안전하지 못하면 아무도 안전하지 못한 것입니다. 하루빨리 모든 국가에 백신이 유통되어서 집단 면역에 도달하기를 기원합니다. 우리는 또 다른 문제에 직면하고 있습니다. 코로나19 상황 속에서 기후변화 대응은 이제 가지 않으면 안 되는 길이 되었습니다. 세계 주요 국가들이 탄소 중립을 선언하고 있습니다. 한국 또한 지난해 2050 탄소 중립을 선언하면서 이 거대한 흐름에 동참하고 있습니다. 한국의 온실가스 배출량은 2018년 기준으로 약 7억 3천만 톤입니다. 향후 30년간 매년 2,400만 톤 이상 줄여야 배출량 제로를 달성할 수 있습니다. 승용차 한 대가 매년 평균 1.6톤을 배출하며 매년 승용차 1,500대를 줄여야 한다고 생각하면 이게 얼마나 많은 양인지 가늠할 수 있을 것입니다. 이는 말 그대로 우리나라 사회 전반의 대전환이 이루어져야만 가능한 일이 되겠습니다. 코로나19를 겪으면서 우리 사회 모든 부문에서 변화가 일어났던 것처럼 탄소 중립을 위해서도 우리 일상의 모든 부문의 변화가 필요합니다. 여기에 모인 우리 모두는 우리 세대와 또 새로운 세대의 미래를 위하여 이러한 변화에 동참해야 합니다. 이번 코로나19 사태를 교훈 삼아 기후변화에 더욱 관심을 가져야 할 것입니다. 이번 ASF 2010은 코로나19 상황에서 가장 효과적인 방법으로 진행될 예정입니다. 비록 일주일 동안 진행되는 짧은 행사지만 다양한 분야별 딥다이브 워크숍, 스페셜 이벤트 등을 준비했습니다. 각각의 행사에 적극 참여하고 전문가들과 의견을 나누어서 저탄소 전환을 위한 기회를 잡으시기 바랍니다. 저와 한국에너지공단 또한 기관 간, 국가 간, 국제기구 간 협력을 통하여 대한민국은 물론 전 세계 기후변화 대응에 노력하겠습니다. 다시 한번 이번 포럼을 준비해 주신 행사 관계자 및 참여자 여러분께 환영과 감사의 인사를 드립니다. 이번 ASF 2010 행사가 성공적으로 마무리되기를 희망하면서 각국이 모두 빠른 시간 내에 코로나19를 이겨내서 평화로운 일상으로 돌아갈 수 있기를 희망합니다. 여러분 모두의 건강과 가정의 행운을 기원합니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. The President of the Asian Development Bank, Mr. Masasugu Asakawa, will now provide welcoming remarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, greetings. On behalf of the Asian Development Bank, welcome to the Asia Clean Energy Forum 2021. We are happy to see that over 3,000 participants have joined this online gathering, our 16th forum since 2006. Our theme this year is accelerating the low carbon transition in Asia and the Pacific. 12 years since ADB's clean energy program started, it is even more relevant today. My friends, as our region confronts and recovers from the COVID-19 pandemic, we must not lose sight of the continued need to promote sustainable development while also taking action on global climate change, which remains the existential challenge of our time. Asia and the Pacific must take its place at the front lines of this effort. The region, which now accounts for 36% of global GDP, has made great progress in economic development and poverty reduction. But it is also responsible for 80% of the world's coal consumption and 60% of CO2 emissions. Many countries have also experienced the devastating consequences of climate change: floods, droughts, heat waves, and storms. Now is the time for bold action. We must commit wholeheartedly to fighting climate change, including meeting the emission reduction goals under the Paris Agreement, all while promoting economic growth and putting the region's development on a green path. In the energy sector, we need to make major changes. These include avoiding the use of fossil fuels and switching to low-carbon fuels, deploying more renewable energy, improving energy efficiency, reducing final energy demand, and incentivizing investment in low-carbon technologies. Making these changes will prove challenging. The pace and scale of the energy transition for countries in Asia and Pacific will vary significantly. Broad commitment across the region, along with tailored country-level support from development partners, will be needed to meet the goal of limiting global warming to no more than 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. Moreover, the pandemic has impeded the progress on sustainable and equitable growth. We need to get back on the path to low-carbon sustainable development. In addition, we have to balance climate mitigation and adaptation efforts. And we must ensure universal energy access, as more than 200 million people in the region still have no electricity. This effort must include addressing the special challenges of disadvantaged communities and the need of women for modern, clean, and affordable energy and for sustainable livelihood. In spite of the current situation, there is a path to addressing these challenges successfully. Let me describe this path and how ADB stands in full support of efforts to make it a reality. Global action to achieve net zero emissions by around mid-century has gained momentum over the past year. Among the countries that have pledged carbon neutrality are the People's Republic of China, Fiji, Japan, the Republic of Korea, Maldives, Marshall Islands, Singapore, and Timor-Leste. This November, the 26th Conference of Parties, or COP26, will convene in Glasgow. More countries are expected to submit more ambitious nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, and to signify their commitment to carbon neutrality. ADB is ready to take on the leadership role in Asia and the Pacific in meeting this commitment. We aim at stepping up our climate finance and capacity building efforts to help our developing member countries achieve their NDCs. Under our Strategy 2030, our target is to focus 75% of ADB's operations on climate adaptation and mitigation. We will also provide at least $80 billion in climate financing from 2019 to 2030, which means in average about $6.6 billion annually. Our climate financing last year was just about $4.3 billion due to the need to address the impact of the pandemic. However, this year, we are confident that we will be able to provide over $6 billion for climate mitigation and adaptation through measures including investing in clean energy, as we did in 2019 when ADB provided in total $6.5 billion for climate finance. ADB will contribute to the global efforts envisioned by COP26 on multiple fronts. This includes promoting disaster collaboration and cooperation, balanced climate mitigation and adaptation efforts, and a holistic approach that integrates ecological, social, and financial aspects of resilience across our operations. And we are aligning our operations to support the targets of the Paris Agreement. We will also continue to utilize our private sector operations, which will be pivotal to filling investment gaps and spearheading technological and business innovation in the pursuit of sustainable institutions. I want to emphasize here that the energy transition requires comprehensive long-term planning combined with effective innovations. ADB is committed to helping our developing member countries as they formulate and implement technology roadmaps to achieve their NDCs. ADB's support is taking full advantage of major technology advances that have slashed the costs of producing renewable energy by up to 80% in the case of solar photovoltaics. Emerging technologies like smart grids, energy storage, and hydrogen are making it easier to integrate renewable energy into power networks and distributed energy systems. Smart technologies have enhanced the flexibility and resilience of power networks. Digitalization has also boosted energy efficiencies on the demand side. Let me offer some examples of innovative energy projects we are supporting that have public and private sectors synergy and cross-sectoral impacts. We approved $8 million grant for our first energy sector project in Kiribati in South Tarawa Renewable Energy Project, involving the installation of climate-resilient solar power capacity on the water reserve. The project design includes rainwater collection as an adaptation measures to deal with extreme weather and a tree planting program for protection of the water reserve. We provided long-term financing in Thailand for a 10-megawatt wind power project with an integrated 1.88 megawatt-hour pilot battery energy storage system. This is the very first private sector project in the country to integrate a utility-scale wind power generation with battery energy storage. Our $100 million loan for the first utility-scale energy storage project in Mongolia will increase renewable energy use by providing a large energy reserve, load shifting capacity, and emergency backup. This will help with Mongolia's decarbonization of its heavily coal-dependent energy system. Last, let me note that we are reviewing ADB's energy policy in light of the profound changes the region is facing in the energy landscape since the current policy was formulated in 2009. Since last year, we have been consulting stakeholders to update our energy policy by the end of 2021. We envision an energy policy that is aligned with our Strategy 2030, as well as global commitment under the Paris Agreement. ADB's new policy will be responsive to the needs of our developing member countries as they build sustainable and resilient energy systems. We are also aiming for a formal withdrawal from financing new coal-fired power generation, while the final decision will have to be made by our board. Let me close by thanking our co-organizers, the United States Agency for International Development and the Korea Energy Agency for their continuing support of this forum. I would also like to thank Mr. Alok Sharma, the President-designate of COP26, for his contribution to ACEF 2021, following his participation in ADB's briefing to the board and annual meeting. He comes with an urgent message, which he has been articulating in various fora, that we must all act now to get the world on track to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. Allow me to acknowledge as well the leading role that the United Kingdom is taking in promoting global action on climate change at this critical time. Finally, I wish to thank all of you for your participation in this year's forum. You are communities of collaboration that our region needs to make our energy cleaner to ensure green, sustainable development in Asia and the Pacific. I wish you a productive ACEF 2021. Thank you.
Thank you, President Matsusugu Asakawa. Next, the keynote message from the President-designate of COP26, Alok Sharma. Minister Nigel Adams, Minister for Asia, Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, will speak on behalf of the COP26 President-designate.
Good morning, and thank you to the Asian Development Bank for organising this year's Asia Clean Energy Forum. I would also like to thank our friends from USAID and the Korea Energy Agency for co-organising this event. The climate crisis is real. COP26, the UN climate conference the UK will host in Glasgow this November, must be the moment the world comes together to deal with the crisis. And we have 4 clear goals to get it to do so. Firstly, we must put the world on a path to net zero. This is vital if we are to limit global temperature rises, in line with the historic Paris Agreement, and avoid the worst effects of climate change. Secondly, we must protect people and nature from the effects of climate change by boosting adaptation. And thirdly, we must get finance flowing to climate action. And fourth, we must work together to get the transition to a green economy moving faster and to make the negotiations in Glasgow a great success. We need governments to plan to adapt to our changing climate and to set clear net zero targets. Long-term strategies are needed to get there, and short-term emissions reduction targets to keep them on track. The clean energy transition is an important step in ensuring a sustainable future for all. With the power sector accounting for a quarter of global emissions, the choices today's governments make will shape our climate for generations to come. Failing to act is not an option. To avoid the worst effects of climate change, the world must decarbonise up to 5 times faster over the next 10 years than we have over the last 20. Asia is already feeling some of the worst effects of climate change, as the terrible floods and typhoons in the region show. Sea level rises threaten major cities and coastal communities, and without action, rice yields could have halved by the end of the century. But decarbonisation not only protects our people, it also makes good economic sense, particularly as we respond to the coronavirus pandemic. Investing in renewables generates jobs and growth, energy security and affordability. The International Renewable Energy Agency reports that renewables could supply half of Southeast Asia's power needs by 2030, while boosting the region's economy over 4% and growing jobs by almost 50%. Prices are falling fast too. Solar and wind are now cheaper than new coal plants. Carbon Tracker predicts that in some places it will be cheaper to build new renewables facilities than run existing coal plants by next year, including in Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam and the Philippines. Coal is simply no longer competitive. Investing in it now risks future stranded assets, so it's no surprise that investors are backing away. Institutions like BlackRock and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank have said they will stop financing coal plants, and investors are turning to renewables. In Vietnam, for example, solar capacity increased over 40 times in a year and has attracted $400 million in foreign investment. The UK's experience show that targets can play an important role in building renewable sectors, sending powerful market signals, giving investors confidence and reducing risk. We have had emissions reductions targets in law since 2008. We will reach net zero by 2050 and we will phase out coal within 5 years. At the same time, we have built the largest offshore wind capacity in the world, with prices falling 2/3 between 2015 and 2019. Momentum for similar targets is building across the world. China, Japan and South Korea all committed to net zero. Singapore and Nepal have too. While the Philippines is no longer accepting proposals for new coal power projects, and South Korea has also pledged to end coal financing. We want to work with countries, businesses and investors on the clean energy transition. That's why we established the COP26 Energy Transition Council, bringing energy leaders together. And in September, we launched the £50 million Clean Energy Innovation Facility. Funded through UK International Climate Finance, it aims to accelerate innovative clean tech in developing countries. So today I can announce that £10 million from this facility will support innovations in artificial intelligence and digitalisation. This will facilitate clean energy transitions in 14 countries across Asia. The UK is proud to work with the Asian Development Bank to drive this initiative forward. This further strengthens our partnership with the ADB on climate action across the region, including through £19.5 million for a diverse range of clean energy projects. Working together ahead of COP26, we will ensure that Asian countries, businesses and investors feel the benefit of what the clean energy transition has to offer. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the keynote message from the UK government in this very important year of COP26. The next keynote message will be presented by the Acting Assistant Administrator for Asia, United States Agency for International Development, Ms. Karen Freeman.
Good morning. On behalf of the U.S. Agency for International Development, I am honored to join you for the opening of the 16th Annual Asia Clean Energy Forum. I'd like to thank our co-sponsors and distinguished colleagues, Mr. Masatsugu Asakawa, President of the Asian Development Bank, ADB Vice President for Knowledge Management and Sustainable Development, Bambang Susantono, Korean Energy Agency's President and CEO, Mr. Chang Suk-kim, the Honorable Alok Sharma, President Delegate for this year's COP26. Like all of you, I care deeply about the environment, about the future of our children and our children's children. Having the privilege of serving the United States government and leading USAID's Bureau for Asia, my focus is to build on this global endeavor, to confront climate change head on before it's too late. The U.S. government has supported the Asia Clean Energy Forum since 2007. We are proud to be a part of this growing coalition, working to build a strong and prosperous Asia that is abundant in accessible, affordable, equitable, and sustainable energy. This forum is a great example of how individuals, organizations, and governments can come together to address a challenge. This week, we are here to learn, to share experiences and insights, and most importantly, to address a critical development challenge: how to accelerate the low carbon transition in Asia and the Pacific. USAID plays a key role in the Biden-Harris administration's bold climate efforts by working with partner countries on the ground to reduce emissions, sustainably develop economies, and increase climate resilience. For over a decade, USAID has been supporting what we call low emissions development strategies, or green growth, with programs that promote efficiency, productivity, and environmental stewardship. In 2010, we launched the Global Climate Change Initiative, and since 2018, we've supported clean energy transitions in the Asia Pacific through the Asia Enhancing Development and Growth Through Energy Initiative, or Asia EDGE. In South and Southeast Asia alone, our programs have helped mobilize over $11 billion for clean energy development over the past 6 years. This resulted in almost 20 gigawatts of new generation capacity onto the grid, which in turn offsets about 11 million tons of carbon dioxide each year. To put this in perspective, These 20 gigawatts of new generation capacity are comparable to powering 2.2 billion LED light bulbs each year. Our assistance to clean energy development in the Indo-Pacific region has significantly increased over the past decade, and through Asia Edge alone, we've allocated millions of dollars in technical assistance, advancing energy security, diversification, access, and decarbonization across the Indo-Pacific. And as part of this increase in funding, we're launching several new high-profile energy programs totaling over $375 million to aggressively scale up Asia's energy paradigm shift. This monumental effort includes programs in countries all across Asia, which focus on helping countries to adopt new energy-efficient technologies and approaches to build sustainable energy systems, modernize utility services, and reduce system and commercial losses. Under Energizing a Net Zero Asia, we'll launch next-generation clean energy programs in Bangladesh, Indonesia, Mongolia, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and regional projects in South and Southeast Asia. I believe that together, these new programs will have major impacts in accelerating this transition to low-carbon options for Asia and the Pacific, while delivering much-needed energy for growth. These are just a few examples of how USAID is partnering with countries to build a secure and sustainable future for the region. We welcome your partnership. There are many more ways that you can work with us, not only with USAID, but with our partners across the US government, including the US Department of State, US International Development Finance Corporation, the DFC, US Department of Commerce, US Department of Energy, US Trade and Development Agency, among others. So please do get in touch with us and let's talk. Climate change presents immense challenges, but also opportunities for a cleaner, brighter future. New investment opportunities, job creation, and the potential for a better public health are just a few. The International Labor Organization reports that about 24 million new jobs will be created globally by 2030 if we enact the right policies, including changing the energy mix, promoting the use of electric vehicles, and improving energy efficiency in buildings. Beyond the obvious economic benefits, accelerating deployment of clean energy will reduce air pollution and associated respiratory diseases. It will result in a healthier environment for all living things. To reap these benefits, and as noted by President Biden during the virtual Leaders Summit on Climate in April this year, nations must work together. In November, many of you here today will join colleagues around the world for the UN Climate Change Conference of the Parties, or COP26, to be held in Glasgow. Our collective mission for Glasgow will aim to do everything possible to keep a 1.5 degree Celsius limit on temperature rise within reach, to keep it on the table. For our part, the United States is committed to a whole of government response to cut emissions in half by 2030, based on 2005 levels. And we will achieve net zero emissions no later than 2050. We need as many countries as possible driving towards net zero greenhouse gas emissions by or before 2050. Through relationships with partners like all of you, we can move forward technological innovations, policy commitments, and build back greener economies as we collectively drive towards the decarbonization of Asia. We can no longer talk about climate change as if it is something in the future. It is here, it is now. And nowhere do we see and feel more severely the impacts than across Asia and the Pacific. The Asia Clean Energy Forum is a great platform for us to highlight the collective work we are doing in the region by drawing together our shared experience, wisdom, and resources This week, I believe we can find ways to turn around the unprecedented challenges facing the region and turn them into unprecedented opportunities in the most equitable manner. The decisions that are made to meet these demands will impact not only their economies and jobs, but the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the world's food supply. So in closing, I'd like to thank you all again for your participation and wish everyone here a successful week of learning, sharing, and building together a roadmap towards a better, greener future for the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Acting Assistant Administrator Freeman. Next is a panel discussion moderated by Dr. Jia Yongping, the Chief of the Energy Sector Group at ADB. The title of the discussion is Net Zero Emissions by Mid-21st Century. Is it possible for Asia and the Pacific? Over to you, Dr. Jia.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Steve. As you have just mentioned, that this panel discussion will ask ourselves and answer this question, net zero emissions by mid-century. Is it possible for Asia and the Pacific? To answer this question, we have three panelists right now. We have Ms. Rehana Mohideen, who is the Principal Advisor at the Nassau Institute of Global Health, University of Melbourne. We have Ms. Magdalena Kuneva, I'm sorry for mispronunciation, Director General, Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Partnership. We have Hongpeng Liu, Director of Energy Division, United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. So you have heard the question, and to set a bit of the background of this question, I have been working in development finance for the last 30 years. And actually, this is the 30 years anniversary for me to be in this business. I've traveled around. Clearly, Asia has showing very strong performance. If you look at the economic growth and the achievement in reducing poverty, and also energy access. If we look at the statistic provided by UNESCAP, that over 95% of people have been connected in developing Asia. So this is a great achievement. At the same time, this achievement has been built primarily from an energy perspective, built on fossil fuels. Let's look at the electricity system, for example. Over 60% of this generation is coming from coal. So the question would be, is it possible, sustainable for Asia to continue to show its strong performance? And if we are not using coal or other fossil fuels, what will be the alternative solutions? Hence, the question I want to ask you on this question, is it possible for Asia and the Pacific to achieve carbon neutrality? If the answer is yes, what are the pathways? What are the actions we need to do? And if we do so, what are the risks going toward this objective of having a carbon neutrality by mid-century? So this will be the first round of questions from me. I hope we will have a second round of questions, getting questions from a chat box from the audience. And then lastly, I'll just give an early warning to our panelists that I will ask you a $5 billion question as a last statement from each of our panelists, that the question will be for you to prepare. Since ADB is delivering $5 billion lending every year in Asia and the Pacific in energy sector, we would like to know your suggestions, your advice, how best we can use these limited resources, since these $5 billion look big, but actually it's only much less than 1% of requirement in the region. So what will be your advice to ADB as we are revising, updating our energy policy? So that's the background and question. May I go first to our friend from United Nations, Mr. Hongpeng Liu, Director of Energy Division in UNESCAP. Hongpeng, please.
Thank you, Dr. Jia. I'm very delighted to join this panel discussion. Congratulations, Dr. Jai, for ASAF. Actually, regularly join this ASAF annually. Unfortunately, for last year and this year, we have to join virtually. Hopefully next year we can join in person. I think the question is really a big question, and there are a lot of answers. But I think at the moment, based on the trends and also the determinations, I can see the net zero emissions by middle 21st century. It's much more ambitious than the NDCs under the Paris Agreement in most of the countries. Probably it's not a question now about how to identify achieve this. But the question is how to find the right pathway, as you said, to achieve it. I think the most significant milestones for sustainable development relevant to energy sector in recent decades is that 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement. Many countries have developed their national policies and strategies through synergies of the National Sustainable Development Strategy intended to achieve SDGs of the 2030 Agenda and also the NDCs. I think they already started to develop this. And also after recently the commitment from many countries for carbon zero by middle of the century. So I think that strategy is improving and is strengthened, and also the country is working on it. I think the first I want to say is net zero by 2050 requires an unprecedented effort by all stakeholders, from government, from international stakeholders, from private sector, civil society, and also include the multilateral development banks. A major transformation of energy sector is required to address the challenges. As you also clearly indicated, providing universal access and support greenhouse gas emissions reduction at the same time, and also enhance energy security and energy system resilience. These are all the challenges and emerging challenges are coming. So for example, this unprecedented pandemic. So how to just address this challenge? To achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Agreement. And secondly, this will have the great impact for all countries. For most developing countries have a challenge to meet the growing energy demand, in particular the universal access and the increase the quality of life of billions. It will also have a great impact for industrial sector, especially those like building materials, iron, steel, chemical industries, and also transport sector. They rely on fossil fuels. How to shift it, how to transform these sectors to use cleaner and renewable energy is a big challenge. So for countries with abundant fossil fuels, especially those to export fossil fuels, they have to develop the strategy well in advance to transform as early as possible. And for energy importing countries, shift to reliable energy supply in the country and the cross-border could be a practical option. So many countries with good renewable energy resources have the potential to accelerate to develop this kind of clean and alternative energy to meet their demand to replace the import. It means the carbon neutrality through transformation of the world provide this kind of challenges and opportunities. And also recently, when we talk about the response to COVID-19 pandemic, and we all think the negative part is really the great impact we already see to the economic growth, to international trade, but we also see there's an opportunity and to align the short-term recovery objectives with the long-term climate and sustainable energy goals. such as the Paris Agreement and SDG 7 I mentioned earlier. Many countries have launched or putting together to building back better and invest in low carbon development with significant positive benefits for employment and the environment. So the COVID-19 stimulus package should also focus on the promoting and financing clean energy and the renewable energy technologies, especially like you mentioned, the phase out of coal and the supporting investment in efficient technologies. So Asia Pacific, given its share of GDP, population, and the energy demand, will drive the global progress on decarbonization. I think the achievements of net zero globally will see how the Asia Pacific is doing. So enhance the international and regional cooperation is essential to facilitate the sharing of experiences and access to clean energy research and technology, including those new emerging technologies. So now to the phase out of coal, I think this is particularly important for this region. From the region, its substitution with renewables and the energy efficiency technology is an urgent priority for the region, given that dwindling carbon budget to stay within 2 to 1.5 degree trajectory highlights the 94% of planned coal and development are in the Pacific. So I think the 94% of planned and the coal development projects are in the Asia Pacific. Therefore, the net zero emissions require the work to phase out of coal to begin now, and both in terms of planned and the existing power plant. So finally, I want to emphasize that net zero should be also inclusive, in particular to keep in mind the vulnerable groups for developing countries in this region. As you mentioned, the 200 million population in Asia Pacific without access to electricity. And also 1.8 billion population, about 40% of the population in the region no access to clean cooking. So achieving net zero and provide clean, affordable, and reliable energy for those are equally important. So we can't just ignore, and also I think we have to accelerate to energy access for those vulnerable groups. I'll stop here. Thank you very much, Dr. Zhang.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Peng, for answering that question. And notice you haven't said, yes, we can. You have spelled out a lot of challenges in meeting this target of carbon neutrality. And looking at the NDCs of countries, if we deliver those NDCs, we're still not achieving the goals. So that will require a lot more effort from stakeholders. And you mentioned one of the ways of doing this is cross-sector, cross-border cooperation, regional cooperation. And with that, we may be able to phase out coal. If Asia will be able to achieve carbon neutrality, then there is a good chance for the world to do so. So although you have not answered my question, I think that we can still think that with this effort, we'll be able to achieve carbon neutrality. So let me turn to our next panelist, Ms. Magdalena. So what's your take? Whether you think, is it possible to answer this question by yes or no?
Thank you very much. Yes, I would like to answer this question as yes. And also due to the pledges that we have seen coming from major governments across the region, I think we can be optimistic and answer this question with a firm yes. However, as the previous speaker pointed out, it is about finding the pathway to achieving such a policy agenda for the Asia-Pacific region. What we know is that the region has not reached its full economic potential. We know it's a region of growing energy demand, and this means that the emissions and the increases in the emissions that normally would be expected to be generated from the region would need to be offset against investments in renewables. And I don't think there is an alternative to this. The COVID period showed that clean energy continue to be a viable asset class, and we continue to see sustained interest in investing in clean energy across the region. However, what I wanted to mention here is that while we have seen stated intentions and national policies, what's really important at this time is to move beyond policies to actual implementation by creating the deal flows, creating the pipelines that are required to mobilize the significant investments to invest in clean energy transition. And you mentioned maybe let me go to one of the questions you asked when you started the panel discussion. What does it really mean? What it really means is using very strategically limited public resources to mobilize private sector finance. And we already seen that more than half of the investments are already coming from the private sector. We already seen significant increases in new generation in the region. However, what I want to say here is that these increases and these investments are not equally distributed. And there's significant differences across the region. So there is no one-size-fits-all approaches, and it means that in addition to regional cooperation, it is important to invest in country capacities. And this in reality means also investing in the local financial sector to be able to mobilize significantly more financial flows to translate the policy objectives into actual projects. And I want to highlight the role of clean energy, small and medium enterprises, especially in markets where we have not seen such a growth of private investment. These are the drivers of the transformation towards clean energy. They are also the drivers for aligned SDG and climate objectives. And they're very key to delivering energy transition and energy access. And the SMEs require significant support from the local financial sector to be able to have access to financing. And what it really means is that countries require their own country-driven capacities to be able to de-risk such projects and to be able to create such investable opportunities on country level. So from if I am to mention a recipe here, and I said it's not a recipe that is relevant to all countries. I mean, there are variations, there are significant variations, but to me, I would mention, in this recipe, I will have three elements. Number one, it is the policy environment. And we have seen, and this is proven, that countries that have improved policy regulatory environment were able to attract significantly more private investment. And this requires really working across relevant country platforms to learn also from others that are ahead and to implement such reforms on national level. Secondly, to me, what's really important is to bridge the gap between projects which are considered investment ready and available capital. I really just want to mention here, there is no shortage of capital, and I have not seen yet the project which is a good bankable project, investment project, which is a ready project that has not attracted private capital. However, at RIP, we have seen the other way around, where there is capital which is available, instruments such as guarantees which are available, but not enough pipelines, not enough projects. And we see this a lot also from the larger scale institutional investors that are ready to invest in clean energy as a new asset class, but they don't have access to bankable pipeline. So market acceleration, creating this pipeline and targeted assistance to project development, to me, this is the second element in a successful recipe. And number three, as I mentioned, it is investing in greening the local financial systems and creating the country-driven climate finance facilities to be able to mobilize significantly more investment flows for clean energy, for energy efficiency investments, for renewables, for mobility, all these priority sectors that were mentioned.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Magdalena, for offering your views. I'm very impressed with your recipe. with three elements in those. I'm very much actually agree with you when I talk about this way of looking, moving forward. The policy environment is the starting point, and we do need as a financer from ourselves. ADB, we look for high level of project readiness. Unless we have enough project, then we can never actually support efficiently, effectively this low carbon transition. And supporting local level financing systems equally very important. I think these are very, very relevant to ADB, and also you are answering by that, answering part of my question, the last question, what advice you would give us to ADB as we revise our energy policy. So let me move to our third panelist, Ms. Rehanna, who is our long-term partner in supporting ADB. I would like to ask you your views on the question I've asked. Is it possible for Asia and the Pacific to move to carbon neutrality from where you are, from your perspective? You're muted, please. Rehanna.
Thank you, Dr. Zai, and I'm very pleased to be participating in this panel. A very important conference, as always has been, particularly in these times, and a very important topic. I guess my short answer would be that yes, it is an imperative. It is an imperative. Partly also because while there are challenges, we need to be ambitious and a lot of hard work is involved, but it's also because there is a certain a window here, and a certain window of opportunity, and it won't last forever, so yes, and it's an imperative. And of course, in the Asia-Pacific region, we also live with countries who are some of the most vulnerable in the world. And our neighbors are also some countries that have very high levels of emissions. I come from one of them, Australia, for example, a big exporter of coal and gas, but which has an enormous potential for solar and other renewable energy sources. But here, I think the discussion about pathways, I agree with the previous speakers, is a really important discussion in terms of how to achieve it. And one of the things that we learned from the COVID pandemic in the health and well-being, if you like, is that all these issues are interrelated and interconnected. Health and well-being is interrelated, is linked to energy, transport, infrastructure, services, and it is very much linked to questions of poverty and marginalization. One of the things, I think a key aspect of this pathway and mapping out the pathway is addressing the problems of the questions of vulnerability. Both between countries, we see here, low-income countries, and access to vaccines is a major issue here, as well as within countries. Because if we don't address questions of poverty, questions of equity, questions of gender equity, and so on, this would be a risk to this transition. You see, I think if we don't address questions of vulnerability and equity, you spoke about risks, then this will slow down the transition. These are the most vulnerable groups. These are the groups who will benefit the most, even though it is an existential question. And so it will slow down the transition, and it will even hamper it. This is a risk. So this question of addressing poverty, equity, gender equality, social inclusion is absolutely key in terms of looking at pathways, because technology can solve a lot of problems, but it's people who matter, and it's people who enable the technologies to work and so on. And we're all familiar with examples of stranded technologies and energy systems. And here I would I would say that renewable energy is a very important part of this pathway for all the points that have already been mentioned. It is becoming more affordable. It is in terms of cutting back emissions and so on. It's certainly a key part of the solution. But I want to pick up on this question of equity here, because some of the emerging trends are quite interesting in terms of women's employment in this power industry, in the energy sector. We are finding that women's employment in the renewable energy industry is higher than in the conventional power industry, oil, gas, and fossil fuels, and so on. I think there were some 2018 figures that showed that women's employment in the renewable energy industry is 32% compared to 22% in the conventional power sector. And this is important. This is important in terms of transformation, because we can't achieve this without transformation. And this also keeps with, I, of course, want to particularly plug distributed energy resources, because I think these are very close to the consumers and it enables consumer management and so on. We've got a great project in the Maldives that we're looking at, the Poised project, which is upgrading their whole system towards solar PV hybrids. And it's also where the grid is going, the old grid getting smarter. We are looking at more and more distributed energy resources. We are looking at a more active grid in that space. And we are looking at prosumers. And the question has always been posed in my mind: is the prosumer a male or a female? At least we want the prosumer to be both. So these are some questions I'd like to pose in terms of pathways. I agree, policy is absolutely key, and I'm very happy to see the revised energy policy for the ADB. But here, I think the question of participatory processes is very important, both in terms of policy and planning, participatory processes. Yes, so I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rehana, for raising these points. I very much agree with you to look at this risk involved in with the vulnerable groups. And also you mentioned the equity issue, but also opportunities for more jobs in renewable energy for women. So with this first round of discussions, we have mentioned the regional issues, private sector, and the equity issues in this transition. I did not get a very, very clear answer whether this is a yes, but I think the answer is a yes, and with a lot of effort. So let's go to the second round of questions. This one would be coming from the audience. We have received a lot of questions. I would just want to pick up one question for each of our panelists. I will start with Bambang. You can imagine or ask a question about regional cooperation. And this is the question in the audience the audience, I think from Sarah Fairhurst, saying that it's very clear that cross-border cooperation is essential. But the pandemic has shown that all countries are shutting down their borders, and that there very less interaction. And what do you see, how this would go forward if the pandemic is becoming a part of our life? What do you see future of the regional cooperations, whether this is a way of resolving our problem? You have mentioned that cooperation is an effective way of reducing emissions because we can share resources, but pandemic has shown differently. So what's your view on this question? Bambang, please.
Thank you, Dr. Jai. It's actually a very good question. So we saw that at the pandemic, when the pandemic started, so many countries closed their border and to protect themselves. That's necessary steps. But we also see during that time, the energy supply, especially electricity supply in those countries, still continue and constantly to provide. People work from home and people use more technologies and remotely working on that, you never feel, shortage of this energy supply. So one of the benefits is because you have a good network. Like if you consider in European countries and also in part of Asian countries, there are great connectivity. So electricity supply is guaranteed. And also at the same time, of course, one side, the demand is declining, but on the other side, the export and the gas and oil is still going on. So no disruptions. But you see the production line chain is actually at the beginning was affected, and also a lot of, especially for renewable energy product, it was definitely impacted. You see the like limited supply, and also the difficulties from the transport sector across border to provide this kind of component for some countries. Actually, I see gradually it's recovered now. And that's exactly why we say regional cooperation, international cooperation is very important. If you see the net zero, that's a global target. So if only one or only two or only even 50% of the countries achieve net zero, the global net zero target cannot be achieved. So you really need to work together to identify what will be the best pathways, best options. So I did answer your question at the beginning. I said, this is not a question. So the question is how we identify the right pathway to achieve the net zero. And also you see some of the countries, because the endowment of resources, so it's very difficult for country to work on carbon zero alone. They have to work together. If you see like in ASEAN, in Southeast Asia, some of the countries, they have very good natural resources, renewable energy resources. For example, Laos. We always call Laos is the battery of Southeast Asia. So they have a great hydropower. So through this kind of ASEAN power grid, that's a great potential to reduce the carbon emissions from the power sector. And if you look at the development of the e-vehicles, probably a lot of countries will be benefited from hydropower and the other renewable energy power if the storage system going increased and also the technology improved. So we see the negative part because of the pandemic. This is really why we see the resilience is so important. If we have the system, if we have the resilience for energy systems, for this low carbon development supply systems, so that we can just resistance for this kind of natural disasters, or even the newly we see the cyber attack, this kind of disasters, and also the unprecedented kind of cases. So I really think a regional cooperation, especially to establish a mechanism, the mechanism to address these issues through negotiations, through countries to work together, that will be the most important. And also, I even think to set up a regional alliance for net zero carbon development, we comprise the different countries, especially the private sector, will be very important. And then to share their information, to exchange their views, and then to support each other. And that I also think ADB has a lot of a role to play, especially I think the next question when I answer, I also want to emphasize how the money will be used to support the regional cooperation. I'll stop here. Thank you, Dr. Zhang.
Okay, thank you, Hongpeng. I think that you clearly demonstrated that I've learned a lot from the pandemic, but the cooperation continues, and like your idea of having a net zero alliance. And you talk about the mechanism. I think UNESCAP is a mechanism for Asia and the Pacific, and together with financing institutions, NGOs, private sector, we can form these alliances to move our agenda forward. We move to next panelist, Ms. Magdalena. You have mentioned the investment readiness and the issues local financing institutions. And the question from the audience, actually first from my list, is how do you see the readiness of developing countries in developing, whether in terms of their policies and their project and developing their clean energy project, versus you have seen what you have seen in developed countries, more advanced countries, in terms of their project implementation and their policies, whether you can see some form of how these dynamics can evolve, that we get our developing countries more ready for what you have said, the project readiness, and develop their local financing systems and put the policy right so that collectively developing countries and other countries can go, moving forward with this goal of carbon neutrality. Question back to Magdalena.
Thanks a lot for this question, Dr. Zen. I think there are significant differences across countries, but on the other hand, there are also similarities. I mentioned the policy environment. We've seen that reverse auctions, for instance, and enabling environment for reverse auctions have led to significant decreases in prices. I mean, this is also due to falling costs of technology, specifically renewable technology, solar, for example. And that, of course, increases the competitiveness of the clean energy technology. However, I mean, one significant difference across countries is that the financial sector in developing markets is less prepared to finance the clean energy transition. And it requires significant investing in building these green lending capacities. And I think this is coming on the top of the other challenge, which exists already in these countries, and this is the overall challenge when it comes to access to finance. The reality is that a lot of the projects and the smaller size sector, specifically the SME-driven clean energy development, they face significant challenges in accessing finance, and this is due to a combination of factors. I would like to mention, for example, collateral requirements, which continue to be very high, and collateral requirements significantly reduce access to finance when it comes to clean energy business models, especially some of these clean energy business models, which are hugely important for energy access in some of the parts of the continent where energy access still is an issue. We mentioned the Pacific, for example, but also with respect to private sector actors, for instance, in agribusiness value chains. You see, when we talk about clean energy, it's not just about renewables generation. It is about integrated solution. It is about clean energy, for instance, in agriculture. It is about clean energy in transport, as the previous speaker was talking about. I think in this case, we are faced with a triple challenge. On one hand, there are the general access to finance challenges for SMEs in general. Secondly, there are real and perceived risks when it comes to private sector-led projects. And thirdly, on the top of it, there are the additional challenges with clean energy models and higher costs and basically requirements such as the collateral requirements. It requires really customized approaches for building these green banking capacities in the local financial sector. And to me, we have seen significant initiative across countries, for instance, coming from bank and non-bank financial institutions. We have seen initiatives for building these green banking capacities and a lot of interest coming our way. And we received some requests from institutions to support them in this journey, to support building these green lending, green banking capacities in these institutions. To me, this to be scalable, this approach requires a country-driven central capacity, so that the benefits of investing in green capacities in the local financial sector are felt more rapidly. I think it was Rihanna talking about the urgency of the challenge. I think the pathway is there, it is possible to achieve it, but we are running out of time. So we really need to do additional steps and go beyond. And we've seen significant interest in building such national climate finance facilities, building national capacities for de-risking projects and using, for instance, risk mitigation instruments. We've seen interest in combining innovative climate insurance products, for instance, with loss reserves in local financial institutions. But I must say, we have also seen dedicated credit lines available for clean energy and not used, untapped. So it is, again, on one hand, we have the issue with the availability and access to finance. On the other hand, even if finance is available, even if instruments are available, we cannot assume that they will be used. And it requires investing in creating the capacity so that the available instruments are used.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Magdalena, for elaborating on this point, and that complements your first round of answers, and so that we understand much better on this key issue. Now, the third question, of course, I ask Ms. Rehana, again from the audience. I read the question to you. Corruption and poverty are among the worst enemies of environment and clean energy. To achieve our targets, we need to involve the real people in the communities. How do you include these factors in the clean energy and net zero roadmaps and engage real people in small and isolated communities who do not have access to electricity to join efforts in clean energy transition? Rehana, the question asked a few times, we should engage with real people. Are we not doing that? Who are those real people we're missing? So your views, please.
Thank you. Yes, I think there's a policy and planning level issue here in terms of participation and consultation and beyond consultation as well, active participation. But in terms of some of the communities that you mentioned, the more isolated ones, the more marginalized communities where questions of access is a real problem linked to affordability, I think here we do need to look at some innovative technology options as well. And this is where I favor smaller scale solutions too. I say this with caution. I'm not saying small is necessarily beautiful, because we do need the grid and the larger scale distribution systems and so forth. But some of those communities, and some of these are also indigenous communities, some of the distributed energy resource kind of solutions would be the more sustainable solutions as well in terms of services accessibility. I think they would also address affordability questions, and this would enable, this idea of enabling technology, that is, people are involved in the process of design, development, and use. You see, because you can have stranded assets. This question of stranded assets, especially in remote communities, is a problem. We see solar PV panels just stranded, not used after a short while. So this is where this distributed energy resources, certainly the energy sector, and some decentralized solutions would be necessary. Rather than the larger scale grid type solutions. But here also, I think there's a role for policy and planning to take this into consideration. And this could also be an area where ADB looks at a little bit more closely in terms of how you more systematically integrate it into the transmission, larger scale transmission, into clean energy generation projects as well. And I wanted to say something about that in the last point. I agree with the previous speakers, Liu and Magdalena. I think this question of regional cooperation is really important, including in the energy space, because it does help us optimize our energy resources. So, for example, Bhutan and Nepal, with large hydropower generation, can share and trade with India, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh, dependent on coal, oil, and gas. And this can also bring down the cost of it and make it more affordable. And that is a question of access, affordability and access as well. Magdalena, absolutely. I agree with you on agriculture and transport, absolutely. And this is where integrated solutions are needed.
Thank you, Ms. Rehana, for answering this question. I think that to reach the real people, we need technologies and also this cooperation, regional cooperation, and cross-sector cooperation. So now we have only 5 minutes left. Come back to my 5 billion question I asked earlier, just to repeat for the audience that ADB's lending in the energy sector per year is about $5 billion. It's less than very much less than 1% of the overall requirement in developing Asia. How best we can use these resources to support those projects, as you mentioned earlier. If you want to propose, your suggestion, your advice, we'll take them into consideration as we are revising the energy policy right now. So back to you, 1 minute each, basically, to answer this $5 billion question. Hong Peng, please, first.
Thank you, Dr. Jai. I already mentioned I will just have ideas to use your 5 billion. And of course, as you said, 5 billion is not enough for energy transition. There are many kind of good projects. But I think as a multilateral development bank, probably your money is like the seed money, and also to provide the directions, a clear signal to the market, to the private sector. So I really think one thing you can do to enhance regional cooperation is you really support those cross-border energy infrastructure with the low carbon technologies. For example, the power grid, with more integration of renewables. And secondly, phase out of coal. There's a cost for phase out of coal. It's really needed this cost covered by the government or if ADB Multilateral Development Bank to demonstrate how this cost and the risk can be minimized, can be reduced. I think that is also where the multi-development bank will do. And also the just transition part, to inclusive and just transition for those vulnerable groups. Your money is very important, although it's not a big one, but it's very important to show how those groups will be included. And also finally, I think in addition to this large one, you also need to pay attention to small group, like energy access. It's very difficult to get banks finance. So you really need to have an innovative mechanism to support those group people to have access to clean energy, net zero technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Hong Peng. Now, Ms. Magdalena.
Indeed, your money is quite a tiny drop in the ocean, and the only solution is to multiply it. And to multiply it, it requires using it into a blending finance context where this funding can be used to mobilize over 10 times more capital from private sector investors. And to do so, if I were the ADB president, I would look across countries and I will I will align with the countries' own interest to develop their blending capacities, their project pipelines, their national climate finance facilities, and I'll help these countries to set up such structures, but I'll also help them to access international climate finance flows that are available And I also help them by providing de-risking mitigation instruments to attract some of this investment, private investment that is necessary to multiply the 5 billion to become 50 billion.
Thank you, Ms. Magdalena. Ms. Rehana, to conclude, you will be the last speaker and conclude this session. You're muted.
I keep forgetting that. Thank you, Yongping. I just wanted to add one aspect to all the points that Liu mentioned. I completely agree with that. And, more systematic integration of gender equality and social inclusion into the ADB's energy portfolio and scaling up pilots where this has been done and so on. But the particular aspect that I wanted to include was capacity building in the industry, and with a focus on increasing women's participation in the industry, and that includes in the utilities, in the corporations, in the industry, which is of course linked to women in STEM. And so on, but also in terms of end users and consumers. So I'm not quite sure what is in the energy policy on that, but capacity building with a particular focus on increasing women's participation in the industry, especially in leadership and STEM related technical positions, and of course at the consumer end to keep that up.
Thank you, Rehana. With that, we conclude this morning's panel discussion. We send back to Steve as moderator. Steve, back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Jai. We look forward to seeing you all in the 28 sessions that are happening this week at ACEF. And we thank you for your participation. We also thank the panelists and the presenters for making the time and the effort to attend. Wishing you a very enjoyable and fruitful ACEF 2021. Stay safe.
Thank you.